The year was 1941, and Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe intelligence officers had just received photographs of something rather peculiar taking shape at the de Havilland factory in Hatfield, a bomber made of wood. The reaction in Berlin ranged from amusement to outright derision. Here was Britain, the intelligence reports concluded, so desperately short of aluminium that they'd resorted to building military aircraft from the same material as garden sheds. Göring himself reportedly quipped that the British were reduced to constructing their bombers from kindling, hardly the stuff of aerial superiority. The German propaganda machine seized upon this apparent weakness with glee. Radio broadcasts mocked the plywood panic gripping Britain's aircraft industry. Luftwaffe pilots were briefed that if they encountered this wooden curiosity, it would likely fall apart under the stress of combat maneuvers. Some German fighter squadrons even joked about carrying matches to finish off any they might encounter. The prevailing attitude was clear. Britain had run out of proper materials and proper ideas. What Göring and his staff didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that on a cold November morning in 1940, a bright yellow aircraft with the designation W450 had already completed its first test flight. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., son of the aircraft's designer, had pushed the prototype to 388 miles per hour during that 20-minute flight from Salisbury Hall. That speed was faster than virtually every fighter aircraft in service with any air force at the time. The Spitfire Mk.V, Britain's frontline fighter, could manage 374 mph on a good day. Germany's pride, the Messerschmitt Bf 109E, topped out at around 354 mph, but speed figures on paper meant nothing if the aircraft couldn't perform in combat conditions. Throughout early 1941, whilst German intelligence continued filing dismissive reports about Britain's wooden desperation, RAF test pilots at Boscombe Down were discovering something extraordinary. The Mosquito, as it was now officially designated, wasn't just fast in level flight. It could outrun German fighters in a climb. It could outdive them. It could outturn many of them despite being a bomber. Flight Lieutenant Reg Reynolds, one of the early test pilots, would later describe the sensation as flying a racing car with wings. Everything else suddenly felt like it was moving through treacle. The secrecy surrounding the program was intense. Fewer than 100 people initially knew the Mosquito's true performance figures. RAF Command understood they possessed something revolutionary, and they weren't about to let the Germans know until it was too late. Training began in strictest confidence at several dispersed airfields across England. The first operational crews were hand-picked, experienced pilots who could be trusted to keep quiet about what they were flying. They practiced low-level navigation, high-speed bombing runs, and most importantly, evasive maneuvers that relied on speed rather than defensive armament. Because here was the Mosquito's most radical feature. It carried no defensive guns, no dorsal turrets, no waist gunners, no tail position. Just two men, pilot and navigator, sitting side by side in a spacious cockpit filled with natural light from its glass nose. The aircraft's defense was simple. Be faster than anything trying to kill you. To the Luftwaffe's way of thinking, an unarmed bomber was suicide. To de Havilland's design philosophy, defensive guns meant weight, drag, and complexity, all things that reduced the speed that kept you alive. By mid-1941, the 1st Mosquito Squadron was working up to operational status. German intelligence still hadn't grasped what was coming. Their reports continued to describe a stopgap measure, a wooden embarrassment that Britain would abandon once proper materials became available. The mockery continued right up until the moment, in September 1941, when the first operational Mosquitoes began appearing over occupied Europe at altitudes and speeds that made interception nearly impossible. The wooden wonder they'd laughed at was about to rewrite the rules of bomber warfare. Geoffrey de Havilland had been arguing for a fast, unarmed bomber since October 1938, when he'd first walked into the Air Ministry with sketches and performance projections that seemed to belong to science fiction rather than practical aviation. His proposal was elegantly simple: build a bomber so fast that enemy fighters couldn't catch it, eliminating the need for defensive armaments, gunners, and all the associated weight and drag. The Air Ministry's response was equally simple: rejected. The reasoning behind that rejection reflected the entire RAF's strategic thinking at the time. Bomber Command's doctrine, heavily influenced by the theories of Italian General WWII, held that heavily armed bomber formations would always get through to their targets. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress epitomized this philosophy, bristling with machine guns, protected by overlapping fields of fire, designed to slug it out with intercepting fighters whilst maintaining formation. Britain's own designs followed similar logic. The short Stirling carried 8 machine guns. The Handley Page Halifax would mount 9. Even the Vickers Wellington, though modestly armed by comparison, relied on its geodetic construction to absorb punishment, whilst its gunners fought back. Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman listened politely to de Havilland's pitch in early 1939 and acknowledged the theoretical elegance. But theory wasn't enough. What happened, Freeman asked, when the aircraft inevitably encountered fighters? What happened during long overwater flights when engine failure meant reduced speed? What happened when battle damage compromised performance? Without guns, without armour, without defensive capability, de Havilland's proposed bomber would be a death trap. The answer was no. Build something conventional instead. De Havilland refused to let the idea die. Throughout 1939 and into early 1940, he refined the design, ran wind tunnel tests at his own expense, and badgered anyone at the Air Ministry who would listen. His persistence earned him a reputation as a brilliant designer who'd become obsessed with an impractical fantasy. The outbreak of war in September 1939 seemed to validate the ministry's position. Early bomber losses over Germany weren't catastrophic, and the doctrine of mutual defensive fire appeared sound. Then came spring, 1940, and everything changed. The German blitzkrieg through France demonstrated what modern fighters could do to lumbering bombers when they caught them. RAF Fairey battle light bombers were massacred over the Meuse bridges, complete squadrons wiped out in single missions. The Advanced Air Striking Force lost aircraft at rates that couldn't be sustained. On 17th of May 1940, 12 Blenheim bombers attacked German positions near Gembloux. 11 were shot down. Defensive armament proved worthless when Bf-109s and Bf-110s could position themselves carefully and attack from optimal angles. The disaster at Dunkirk crystallized the problem. British bombers attempting to support the evacuation were cut to pieces by German fighters. Speed, it became horrifyingly clear, mattered more than guns. A bomber that couldn't be caught, couldn't be shot down, a truth so obvious in hindsight that the Air Ministry's previous rejection now seemed almost criminal in its short-sightedness. In July 1940, with Britain facing invasion and the Battle of Britain raging overhead, the Air Ministry reversed its decision. De Havilland received authorization to proceed with his fast bomber concept, now officially specification B-140. The caveat was brutal: used no strategic materials. Aluminium was needed for Spitfires and Hurricanes. Steel was needed for tanks. Whatever de Havilland built, it had to come from materials that weren't rationed, weren't critical to other war production, and wouldn't compete with established programs. The answer was wood, specifically a composite sandwich construction of Canadian birch plywood, bonded with Ecuadorian balsa cores. The same techniques used in building racing boats and grand pianos would now build Britain's fastest bomber. The construction technique de Havilland's engineers developed was called alclad plywood sandwich, but that technical term disguised what was actually revolutionary craftsmanship masquerading as mass production. Each component consisted of two thin sheets of birch plywood with balsa wood strips running between them. The whole assembly bonded together with a phenol formaldehyde resin called aerolite. The resulting structure was light, immensely strong, and possessed something no metal airframe could match. It absorbed vibration beautifully. Pilots would later describe the Mosquito's ride quality as smoother than any metal aircraft they'd flown. But who would build these wooden bombers when every aircraft manufacturer was already working triple shifts on conventional designs? The answer came from Britain's furniture industry. In High Wycombe, the heart of England's furniture-making region, craftsmen who'd spent careers building dining tables and wardrobes found themselves recruited into aircraft production. The skills translated perfectly. They understood wood grain, knew how to work with adhesives, could judge tolerances by eye and touch. Piano manufacturers from London joined the program, bringing expertise in curved laminates and precision joinery. Boat builders from the south coast contributed knowledge of waterproof bonding and stress distribution. Secret factories sprang up in the most unlikely locations. A furniture repository in Hatfield became the main assembly line. A garage in Leavesden took on wing production. Salisbury Hall, a medieval manor house in Hertfordshire, served as the initial prototype workshop, chosen specifically because its grounds were screened by trees, invisible to German reconnaissance aircraft. Even more remarkably, production was deliberately dispersed into hundreds of small workshops. A cabinet maker in Buckinghamshire might spend months crafting nothing but tailplane ribs, never seeing the finished aircraft, never knowing exactly what he was contributing to the war effort. The first production aircraft began rolling out in mid-1941, and the performance figures validated everything de Havilland had promised. The Mosquito B Mk4 bomber variant, powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin 21 engines producing 1,460 horsepower each, achieved a maximum speed of 380 miles per hour at 17,000 feet, whilst carrying a 2,000-pound bomb load. That was faster than the Spitfire Mk4 at the same altitude. It was faster than every German fighter except the Focke-Wulf FW-190 in a straight line, and even the 190 couldn't catch a Mosquito that had any altitude advantage. The fighter bomber variant, the FB Mk6, would eventually reach 408 miles per hour, making it the fastest operational combat aircraft of 1943. For context, the United States' Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, one of the war's most formidable fighters, maxed out at 433 mph, but that was without bombs, without external stores, in optimal conditions. The Mosquito achieved its speed whilst carrying ordnance, whilst maintaining range, whilst retaining the ability to climb rapidly if intercepted. Range was equally impressive. With standard fuel tanks, a Mosquito could reach Berlin and return, a 1,050-mile round trip with bomb load intact. Drop tanks extended that to over 1,500 miles, putting virtually any target in occupied Europe within reach. The Lancaster heavy bomber, by comparison, achieved this range by being enormous, slow, and requiring a crew of 7. The Mosquito did it with 2 men in an airframe that weighed less than half what a Lancaster did empty. German intelligence finally grasped what they were facing in early 1942, when Bf 109 pilots began filing bewildered combat reports. Engaged twin-engine bomber, achieved firing position, target accelerated away, read one report from Jagdgeschwader 26. Pursued at full throttle for 8 minutes, could not close distance. Another. Fast bomber identified over Cologne, climbed to intercept, target climbed faster. The wooden joke had become Germany's nightmare. An aircraft that appeared over the Reich in broad daylight, photographed targets, dropped precision ordnance, and vanished before fighters could reach operational altitude. What made the Mosquito truly revolutionary wasn't just its speed, it was the bewildering versatility that came from that basic airframe. The same wooden structure that carried bombs over Berlin could be modified for a dozen different roles, each performed better than aircraft specifically designed for those missions. By war's end, over 40 distinct variants had emerged, each proving that de Havilland's fundamental design was adaptable enough to handle whatever the RAF threw at it. The photo reconnaissance variant arrived first, entering service in September 1941 with No. 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit at RAF Benson. The PRMKI stripped out all bombing equipment, installed fuel tanks in the bomb bay, and fitted cameras in the rear fuselage. Flying at 38,000 feet, higher than most fighters could effectively operate, these aircraft photographed German naval bases, mapped invasion beaches, and tracked V-weapon sites. Flight Lieutenant Alastair Taylor completed the first operational sortie on 17 September 1941, photographing Bordeaux and La Pallice from 25,000 feet. German fighters scrambled, but never came close. Over the next 4 years, Mosquito PR variants would fly over 5,000 reconnaissance missions and lose fewer than 40 aircraft, a survival rate unmatched by any other reconnaissance aircraft in any air force. The Night Fighter variant transformed RAF Fighter Command's defensive capabilities. The Mosquito NF-Mk2, entering service in January 1942 with No. 157 Squadron, carried AI Mk4 radar in a solid nose, 4 20mm cannon in the belly, and 4.303 machine guns in the nose. Wing Commander John Cunningham, already famous as Cat's Eyes Cunningham for his night fighting prowess, scored the variant's first kill on 30 Roses January 1942, destroying a Junkers Ju-88 over Norfolk. The Mosquito could chase down Germany's fastest bombers, the Ju-88 and Dornier Du 217, with ease, whilst carrying enough firepower to destroy them in a single firing pass. By 1944, Mosquito night fighters had shifted from defensive patrols to offensive operations, following German bombers back to their bases in occupied France and shooting them down as they attempted to land. Anti-shipping strikes proved another natural role. The FB Mk6 fighter bomber variant, armed with 4 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns, devastated German coastal convoys. No. 143 Squadron began operations in November 1942, attacking shipping in the Skagerrak and along the Norwegian coast. The standard tactic involved racing in at wave top height, too low for radar detection, popping up to 50 feet, and raking ships with cannon fire before they could react. Larger vessels received visits from FB MiG-6s carrying a single 4,000-pound cookie bomb or 8 rocket projectiles. The Mosquito's speed meant German flak batteries had perhaps 3 seconds to track and fire, insufficient time for effective engagement. Pathfinder duties saw Mosquitoes marking targets for the main bomber stream. Number 105 Squadron pioneered these operations using OBO, a radio navigation system accurate to within 300 yards, to drop target indicators over objectives obscured by cloud or darkness. On the night of 31st January 1943, Mosquitoes marked the targets for the first ever RAF raid on Berlin since November 1941. The symbolism wasn't lost on Berliners. British bombers had returned to the capital and there was nothing the vaunted Luftwaffe could do to stop them. Beyond Europe, Mosquitoes hunted submarines in the Atlantic, flew meteorological reconnaissance over the Arctic, and operated with No. 618 Squadron in Burma against Japanese communications. In the Mediterranean, they struck Axis shipping and provided